Thank you very much. I'll present myself as a beginning. I'm Tali Yaron Elder. I'm a lawyer. I'm a tax lawyer. I was the head of the Israeli IRS for a few years. I worked for the government for 16 years. And I'm in the private sector in the last 15 years. I practice tax law, and I also deal a lot with trusts as a mean or a way of planning the transfer of assets within the family. That's the topic I'm going to speak about today, and to see how we can use Israeli trusts as a basis for planning the future, as you said, Mark, or planning the transfer of assets within the family. The trust is in Israel was put into the law 1975, a long time ago. But it took a long time for Israelis to understand and to get used to using trust. Even now, Israelis are not as used to use trusts as people that come from Anglo-Saxon countries do. The creation of trusts as a mean of transferring assets within the family is very common outside of Israel. In Israel, the practice has begun just the last 15 years when we put into the law the taxation of trusts, and we talk more and more about using trusts for family purposes. תעביר לשקף הראשון. What is a trust? A trust is a contract between people that transfers the title of assets, property, or other things, and the transferee of these assets tells the trustee what he can use these assets for. The emphasizes that the title is transferred to the trustee. That is the basis for the agreements made. When the title is transferred, then we can use the trust for the reasons I'm going to talk about. That's the basis. In order to transfer these assets, you need, of course, to know that you can rely on the person because you have a contract with him. It says, please do with these assets what I ask you to do. תעביר לשקף הבא. But why do you need the trust? What do you need them for? We use the trust for protecting assets. As I said, the title is transferred to the trustee. When the title is not anymore yours and is not anymore the title or of the beneficiary, it doesn't belong to either of you. When it's doesn't belong to either of you, it's protected from other people. It could be from other family members. It could be from the government. It could be from inheritance tax. We'll talk about that later. But it's protected by taking the title out of the transfer from the beneficiaries and the settler of the trust. They don't own anything. When you don't own anything, it can be taken away from you. The trusts are used for taking care of future generations. Meaning you want to put the money on the side and say that it will be used by next generations. You can say how much you want to give them. You can say when do you want to give them, and it will be done by the trustee. It helps dealing with inheritance tax. Why? Because you take out the title, you take out the asset from the person that created the trust, and you didn't give it yet to the beneficiary. But when the person that created the trust dies, it doesn't belong to them. It doesn't belong to them, meaning there's no inheritance tax because no one inherited anything. So you deal with trust, and it's very common in the United States, deal with trust when you want to avoid inheritance tax. And it's part of your planning. It's done also in other countries. You can create trust for charities. You can create trust to have the separation of property. If you don't want someone to be entitled to the assets, or just want them to be entitled to in some conditions, you put it in a trust and you say, in these conditions, you can transfer the asset to this and this person. That's why we use the trust. In the past, trusts were used more as a tax avoidance for tax purposes. In these days, when the information flows from the banks and from the trustees and from the tax authorities one to each other, we don't use trust anymore for tax avoidance. We use them for these plannings. We use them for dealing with inheritance tax. We use them for some small tax planning. It's not avoidance, but planning, but we don't use anymore for tax evasion, as we saw years ago. And we see now that the trusts that were created on offshore companies in the past moved to onshore trust more and more, because the rules regarding offshore have become more and more difficult, and people prefer to move the trust onshore instead of having them offshore. תעבור לשקופית הבאה. When we're talking about the trust, we're talking about these people. We're talking about the settler that decides what to transfer to the trust. He's the one that transfers the assets to the trust. He appoints the trustee. Usually, he appoints also a protector. We don't need always a protector, but usually, and I always suggest to have a protector. Why? Because a protector can change a trustee, which was one of the questions that I was asked. You can change a trustee. Usually, a protector can transfer from one trustee to the other. Other possibilities or other responsibilities of a protector could be changing beneficiaries in some conditions, or deciding on things when the settler didn't think about at the beginning. It can help decide all kinds of things. We have, of course, the beneficiary, which the settler at the beginning says, I want the beneficiary to be my children. I want the beneficiary to be, sometimes we use a trust that the settler is also a beneficiary, the first beneficiary. If he dies, we have a second beneficiary. So he decides on the beneficiary. And sometimes we also have an investment committee. What is the investment committee? When we don't want the settler to have any authority, we ask him to appoint an investment committee that they can advise the trustee what to do with the money, with the assets. They always have good advice. I mean, usually the trustee listens to them, but they can't enforce what they say, but usually they give very good advice to the trustee. These are the basic people that we would have on a trust in order to, as I said, transfer the title, transfer the assets to the trustee, and on the other side, have all the controls to make sure that the trustee will do what the settler asked him on the contract that they signed at the beginning. The Israeli trust law. When you create an Israeli trust, you have to hold the assets to some kind of a company, or you can't, the trust itself can't hold the asset because it has no legal ability. The Israeli trust. Most of the countries, the trust itself doesn't have a legal ability. And then the trust assets are held by a company or a private, usually it's a company. This company is dedicated to the certain trust that we're creating. So when we're creating a trust, let's say Tali's Trust, we would create a company that would hold the assets, and it would be called Tali's Trust. And it will hold only my assets. This company would be held by the trustee, or a trust company if you want to be sure that if something happens to the trustee, it would be a company, but it would be held by a trustee. So each trust has a company, an underlying company. For tax purposes, תעבור לשקף הבא. This company is looked at as a look-through company. It has no, it doesn't have to file, it doesn't have to do anything. It's just a look-through company for legal purposes. It can open a bank account, it can hold the assets, but for filing for the tax authorities, this company doesn't exist. So who files for the tax authorities? In the Israeli law, the trustee would file for the Israeli tax authorities. It's regulated in the Israeli law that the trustee files on the name of the settlor or beneficiary. Most of the trust would file as if the assets belongs to the beneficiaries, according to the law. Some according to the settlor. It depends, but most of them would file like as if it belonged to the beneficiary, meaning you can use a trust, or you get all the benefits, all the tax benefits, as if you had the assets yourself. Let's give an example of Oleh Chadash, or a returning resident that have the 10 years exemption. He's a beneficiary of the trust. Even though he's a beneficiary of the trust, the trustee would file as if he holds the assets by himself, meaning he'll be able to use the 10 years exemption. And in this case, the first 10 years, the trustee won't even file. We would open a file saying we have this in this trust, and that's all. Because you have and you can use the exemptions that Oleh Chadash has in Israel. So you don't use these exemptions. Now, the tax law regarding trust in the last 15 years is quite clear, and we know where to file and who to file. If you have in a trust also non-Israeli settlers or beneficiaries, you would have to look also at the laws in their country. I mean, if you have a US settler or US beneficiary, the Israeli laws are the same as a Belgian settler or beneficiary. But you always have to look at the laws in the other country if you have non-Israeli settler or beneficiary. The residency of the trustee, the residency of the protector has no impact on the law. There's no impact on how you file. How you file is regarding, takes into account the residency of the settler and the beneficiaries. The others have no meaning regarding the filing. In Israel, basically, it's cheaper to hold a trust when you compare it to other countries. And the last 2-3 years, it took a while, but we found a way to open bank accounts to trust, which was a very difficult task in Israel. Foreign banks are used to opening bank accounts to trust. Israeli banks, it took them a while to do that. When you have a trust, the trust will file, the FATCA will file all the documents in the bank because he has the title on the assets. So he does everything and he files everything in the bank and the FATCA and so on. תעבור לשקף הבא. One of the main things, or not the main, but one of the things that I'm asked very commonly is inheritance tax. Do we have an inheritance tax in Israel? How do we use trust for inheritance tax? Now, as I said, when you transfer the assets to the trust, then you don't have any more inheritance because it's transferred, it's distributions from the trust. So in most countries, using trust helps dealing with inheritance tax. In Israel, we don't have inheritance tax, not yet, and to my knowledge, not planned in the near future. I've been working with the tax authorities. No, I know the tax authorities for the last 35 years. There have been talks about inheritance tax all this time. All the time I heard about inheritance tax and planned and tried to put it into the law. It was put into the law once in the years around the beginning of the 80s. And it was canceled after a short while because they understood that having an inheritance tax in Israel is also goes together with taxing presence. It can't go without taxing presence. And having this and giving exemptions for a house and the minimum money, and people that have a lot of money will anyhow plan it. So they decided not to put into the law inheritance tax. I don't think they'll put it now, but who knows? But one thing I know, that if I look all over the world, using trust is a way to not pay inheritance tax or to plan your inheritance tax. And another way, and here we're going to the next part of the session, is having kinds of insurance. I'm sure Avner will talk about it in a minute. All kinds of insurance that can be used to avoid inheritance tax. And I'll add one more thing, that the trust can be a beneficiary in this insurance. So by saying that, Avner, your part.
Thanks, Tali. Hi, guys. Thank you for joining. I'll give a small talk about a few points that surround what Tali discussed right now. The points that I believe from our experience show that clients making Aliyah, living in Israel, find different versus what you're used to from the States especially, but South Africa, the UK, Australia, things are different in Israel. One of them is, as Tali explained, there's no inheritance tax here in Israel. And the solutions, therefore, are life and property that will be part and parcel of the solution needed. One of them is the life insurance. Life insurance counter all the complexities of building an estate, making sure things are done properly, using professionals, such as Tali, for that sort of planning. Life insurance in Israel is a very straightforward, simple tool. It is the advantage of the tool. The tool provides a lump sum one-time payout to the family, which will provide a no tax or a tax-free payout to first relation. And by doing so, it provides the ability not to wait for the entire legal procedures that need to be attended to until receiving the money, but death occurs, death certificate provided to the insurance company, and payment made within 30 days and provided to the families. What we find with regards to the complexity of life insurance in Israel versus life insurance overseas, similar to what Tali said, unlike planning overseas where you have all of life insurance policies running throughout the time span in order to provide financial protection for a loss. Here in Israel, as that planning does not exist purely for the fact that the payment of the tax is not needed, the life insurance normally will correlate with retirement, or at times be extended. Retirement in Israel for a male is 67, for a female 64. People normally work longer than that for good or bad reasons, I don't know, but that's what happens. And the life insurance is carried out till 70, 75. That's more or less the age, so you don't have the life insurance running throughout as you might be used to from other places. There are advantages to the life insurance here in Israel by virtue of the fact that since 1973, the Yom Kippur War occurred, deaths occurred, and from that date onward, all insurance carriers in Israel have to provide by law active and passive war activity. We remember September 11, where insurers around the world turned back to people living in Israel saying to them, listen guys, we're providing life insurance, but without active and passive war activity. So it's important to understand that the solution exists locally. The solution as well, which is the protection of currency. Okay, so when you plan the numbers that you want to have, how you want to protect, and suddenly the shekel becomes stronger or weaker, depending how you look at it. And instead of having $1 million, which is 4 million shekels, you have $1 million, which is 3.3 million shekels. The currency risk exists. Again, locally having the insurance provides that security, not needing to look out in brackets for the currency issue. In Israel, if you correlate or you add into pension planning the issue of the protection, so life insurance is a tax deductible expense for a self-employed person, or if you take the life insurance for an employed person, it will be pre-tax money. The life insurance can be issued through the social benefit payments provided by the employer and employee, and you can plan such that the cost of the life insurance is not really coming out of your ongoing current budget. Good or bad is a matter of planning together with the individual, but it's a possibility that exists. Another adjacent type of solution, which is not pure life insurance, is the widow's pension that provides in pension funds. Pension funds in Israel, upon death, will provide a monthly source of income. Disadvantage is that that income is going to be income, so it's going to be taxed. How is it going to be correlated into a trust will be something that you'll have to speak to the trustee or to someone that will advise. But the advantage is it provides a monthly source of income for the rest of the person's life. And if you've got kids under the age of 21, it will provide an additional amount of money, providing a monthly security that the person can use and maintain to look after himself, his family, for a longer period of time. If we switch for a second from life insurance, from pure life insurance, and go to the properties that people own, one of the points that is important for me to emphasize, because I find that more and more a difference in understanding with our clients that come from overseas. Unlike the States where you have the co-op that takes care of the entire property, including the joint property and the private property and the liabilities that relate to the different properties. In Israel, for better or for worse, people are individuals, and being so, each person looks after their own insurance for their own apartment. That means that in concept, or one of the reasons that a lot of people arrange insurance in a rebuilding value concept is the banks. The banks turn around, say, you've got a mortgage, I want insurance, and the demand of the banks is rebuilding. What is rebuilding value insurance? It comes along and says X square meters times the average rebuilding per square meter, and it takes that and calculates a certain sum to be insured. In other words, the person living in Tel Aviv and the person living in Eilat, assuming they've got the same 100 square meters, will have the same sum insured. It doesn't mean, obviously, that the value of the property in Tel Aviv and the value of the property in Eilat will be the same value. Who needs the rebuilding value and who is threatened by not having the proper or having only rebuilding value will be dependent on the ability or inability to rebuild the property. The inability to rebuild the property will obviously be dependency, right? If we are a standalone property on a ground floor house and there's an earthquake tomorrow and there's no house to live in, then the insurance companies in Israel will pay us livability for a year. In the meantime, we're building our house back. We don't have anyone else that we have to connect with in order to be able to rebuild, and we're able to arrange the rebuilding of the property. Then we have the scenario case, like a scenario that we dealt with 4 years ago already in Jerusalem, where we had a property that the building, at the bottom of the building, there were renovations. The guy doing the renovations didn't issue proper renovation insurance. Gas explosion occurs. The gas explosion demolishes 2 buildings. Not that the buildings collapse, regretfully, if we talk in the simplicity, because then everyone would be able to rebuild. But what happens is the buildings are standing. The municipality dictates and states that those buildings are not habitable. And now the people have to deal with the properties. The only property that was insured with the market value was a client of ours that received his full market value and is long gone out of the picture. The rest of the people have received the rebuilding value, but the rebuilding value is not enough to take care of all the complexities of rebuilding those 2 buildings. And hopefully that will be solved eventually as well. How does that connect to trusts? Because when we look at the planning, the whole concept of trusts is planning ahead, is trying to foresee the future, is trying to put across to Tali, to myself, to say, listen, this is what we want to happen. These are the assets that we've accumulated. These are the problems that we have. Please help us plan ahead. Same applies here. If you know that the insurance provided for the asset or the life insurance or the widow's pension that we've discussed are such that you are dependent or not dependent, then we can build a protector that will provide a long-term solution for the different needs that people have. Last point that is important for me to emphasize, as Tali indicated, the banks having a hard time in understanding the concept of a trust and allowing opening a bank account for trusts. Our industry had the same problem in understanding that trust exists and that trust should be added on to the home insurance policies or property policies that are out there. Today, I'm happy to say that it is possible. I urge you, though, to understand that because the complexity and because the liabilities can be all surrounding trusts, properties, participants, beneficiaries, the wording of how and who is listed as the owner of the policy is very important and should be accounted for accordingly. So that is the last point that I have with regards to that. And I'll put the house with regarding to the trusts. Back to Tali at this point.
Maybe, thank you. I think it's a good question. It's a good time I'll answer the two questions that we have still open for. The first question was, do we have in Israel a revocable trust? In Israel, you can have a revocable, irrevocable trust. It's looked as a contract. So you can decide what to put on your contract. You can have any kind of trust that you can comes into your mind. So there's no problem regarding that. The second question is regarding special needs the trust that is created in the United States. In Israel, we don't have this kind of definition. In Israel, a trust is a trust, and it's not called a special needs trust. It's a regular trust, but you can use this structure in order to pay amounts to special, whatever you decide. As I said, it's a contract. So you can say, please pay this and this, this amount every month, this amount every year, please do this and that. So it's not called a special needs trust, but it's you can have a special needs trust, or you can have a trust that you want for any purpose you decide or you want. Transferring the trust from another country, from the United States or from another country, is possible. Not always. The question will be how the trust is structured in the other country. In some countries, it's okay to transfer the trust to an Israeli trustee as it is. And in some countries, you have to transfer from one trust to the other to create a new Israeli trust, and then to dissolve the old trust and to have a new trust. The difference would be according to the structure. If you have a structure that is similar to an Israeli structure, then you can transfer it. If you have a structure which is different, which is legally different, in some countries, the trust itself is a legal entity that we don't have in Israel. So if we have a legal entity that we don't have in Israel, you can't transfer the trust as it is. You have to dissolve it and create a new trust. I'm trying to look at the questions. Did I miss anything? A U.S. trust or a foreign trust, it's right about a U.S. trust or any other foreign trust. A foreign trust is considered a trust in Israel. So the filing obligations of this trust is based on who the settler is and who the beneficiary is. If you have an Israeli settler / beneficiary, you would probably, even if you have a foreign trust, have to file in Israel. The filing in Israel could be has to be by the trustee. If it's a foreign trustee, usually he would use an Israeli accountant or someone that would file for him in Israel. But the filing in Israel is not based on the residency of the trust. It's based on the beneficiary or the settler. If you have some Israeli connection, you would have to file in Israel. The people that are Israeli residents and US citizens, which I see a lot. The trust law in Israel is based on the residency. So if you are an Israeli resident, you would get into the Israeli trust law and file accordingly. As you know, the US law is based on citizenship also, and even having a green card in the United States gives you obligations in the United States. So the obligations are on both countries. Usually, and I'm saying as a very general rule, the United States will tax only distributions to US persons. It won't tax the trust itself, but it will tax when you distribute to US persons on quite a high rate. But that's very general rule. It has a lot of ways around. It's a general rule, okay? But what I can say about it is that both laws apply. Both Israeli and US laws apply. US is the only country that puts its rules on citizenship only regarding trusts. So if you're a French citizen and an Israeli resident, the laws are according to the Israeli law only. This I answered. I think I answered all the questions. Did I miss something, Mark?
Nope, you're really on top of it. This is amazing expertise you're sharing with us. Thank you so much.
If you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer about the trust. Basically, what I can say about the trust, that I see it as a very, very good way of planning the assets and transferring it within the family and making it easy for everyone. When you decide from the beginning how you want to transfer, who do you want to transfer, and to make sure that people that you don't want them to get the assets, they won't put their hands on the assets. I think it's a very good tool. It's not known enough in Israel. It's used much more frequently outside of Israel, and I think we're on the way that it will be used more and more in Israel. The laws in Israel apply to it and give a lot of the answers to how you should use it.